So, hey guys, I am Lauren Rivers, and most of you probably know, and for those that don't, I am transgender. I am looking to transition. I don't know exactly how far I feel I'll need to take it, but to step back for a moment, if you're not familiar with the term, which I think these days most everybody probably has at least heard it, it's a person whose personal identity and gender does not correspond to their birth sex. And growing up, I never really knew what exactly transgender was. In the 80s, the best you really ever saw was drag queens, things like that. Cases where people were clearly just guys in a dress. And it was accepted as, I think, a fringe cross dressing thing, but not really something that would be considered mainstream. And, when I was a kid, I used to do some things that at the time, I mean, I don't know if they would strike anybody as weird, but borrowed my mom's heels on occasion when I was a kid. I pretended to be a girl sometimes, and most of the fursuits, if you've seen my fursuits in the last probably about 20 years, almost all of them have been female characters for one reason or another. And it used to be a point of pride with me to pass as female in suit. Because, when somebody would say something like, I can't tell whether or not that's a guy or a girl in there, that would always make me happy, whether just because, at least at the time anyway, it felt like if you can't tell, then it means that I'm doing my job right, as a female fursuiter. And it was just kind of one of those things that always filled me with a little bit of a positive vibe. So, I always appreciated when somebody said something like that, whether or not it was in suit or out of suit. And back when I was growing up, options for transitioning were somewhat limited, or at least I don't think that there were too many that were publicly available. You knew about things like sex change operations, but they were like big deals, and it was kind of one of those things where I was under the impression, perhaps true, perhaps not, that you pretty much had to go all or nothing for it to count. That you couldn't be a woman without going through the whole process, surgery, everything, all the whole nine yards. And I think at the time anyway, the impression I had was that you had to do the whole thing in order to count. And I think a lot of people in the transgender community, or at least that are considering approaching calling themselves transgender, feel like they have to pass this invisible threshold to qualify or to justify their feelings. And so I know a friend of mine who's always, I really get the feeling like they're transgender, but they always kind of are hesitant to officially accept that label. And, not to, I mean, just, I mean, I can understand it because, I mean, I was in that space for a good long while. And I mean, people have different reasons. I mean, nobody's exactly the same when it comes to being transgender or whatever you might happen to consider as your personal identity. But in the case of me, I felt that it was a question of fear. I mean, I was afraid of what my coworkers would think. I also assumed that just by virtue of where I lived that it was off the table because, I wasn't sure if I wanted to move just so that I would be able to transition, even if it was important to me. I mean, selling your house, moving all your stuff, let's face it, that's a big deal no matter how you slice it. Most people that I know of don't move unless they have to. So, if it was the kind of thing, well, I guess it was a moot point in my case, but I know that like, for some people, they're just, I don't know. It's I guess a lifetime of ingrained beliefs and things that we always assume to be true that keeps a lot of people from pursuing their transgender identity. And for a lot of us, I think it's just like we're used to the comfortableness of what society accepts us as, and we don't really want to rock the boat because we're afraid of losing what we have, even if the possibility of what we might gain on a personal level is so much more significant than what we might risk. But I mean, it's human nature, and it makes sense because you don't want to potentially, and as I always say, never gamble more than you can afford to lose. And in cases like this, it's a big gamble. I mean, nobody's going to tell you that it's not. So, and it's one of those things that it's, it's logical, it's reasonable to be uncertain, I guess, to be questioning about these sort of things. But this is why you have the transgender community. This is why you have doctors and counselors that can help talk you through this. And it's like I kind of think that for me, at least at this point, that I've reached a stage where it's at the very least, this is one of the things in life that I am sure of. And I guess I'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. But I'd seen a lot of transgender folks. The community that I happen to be a part of has a pretty accepting worldview. So, I mean, I know a lot of people who are transgender, some of which are just starting, some of which have considered starting, some of which have been well further along than I am. And, even though I've had a lot of examples of people that are pretty good at passing, um, if that's your goal anyway. I mean, obviously, it's not something everybody has to feel like they has to do, but even with these examples of the finished product, so to speak, in front of me, for a long time, I convinced myself that fursuiting was enough to satisfy these desires for me. And for a while, it was. And I guess maybe it was just it. I had reached a point where that was no longer true. And I guess back in November, I decided to dye part of my hair blue, like my character Lauren. And it took a lot of guts to get me to do that because I had been thinking about it for a while, and long time ago I had talked about dyeing my ponytail blonde like my tiger character, but I never ended up doing it. Well, finally, I just decided, okay, I mean, maybe I should just make myself do this. And the morning of the appointment, I was super nervous about going to do getting my hair dyed. So I decided that I had to do this, and I made myself go to the hair salon and get my hair dyed blue. I didn't think it was going to take 4 hours, but here we are a few months later, and of course I still have to find out whether or not I can do it again. But even if I can't, I like it. I'm glad I did it, and I'm happy that with the end result, even all this time later, because every time I see that little bit of blue in my hair, it makes me happy. So let's see. And being able to do that, walk into work the next Monday morning, made me seriously evaluate if I could live with never pursuing transitioning. And then when I asked myself if I could live with that, then my answer was no. And that made it easy for me. I mean, being in the middle of things like this, it sucks. Like you're not really one thing or the other. You kind of are constantly being pulled between two very different options, and the worst part is not knowing which way you want to go, because there's safety over here, which is what you've always known to be true, and then there's the potential for greater happiness, but it comes at a lot of risk, and there's a lot of work that goes into it. And as a friend once told me, it's like, be prepared to lose all of your friends, your family. There are people in this country who are not super accepting of that sort of thing, and people can get disowned over this, people can get fired, even if it's not necessarily uh, legal reasons, or whatever the case may be. I mean, who knows? But it's one of those things that, at least for me, if you're sure about it, it's the most important thing, and everything else is kind of secondary. Not to say that your job and your family are not important, because they are. Especially if you're fortunate enough to have a good support system. I have to say, big shout out to my mate Ben's family, who was surprisingly really okay with all this. And my mom was a little bit, I guess, a little bit surprised, and I can't say that I blame her, because it's not really something I really ever discussed. And unfortunately, due to the distance, I don't get to see my family that often. But as far as I know, I think that eventually, they'll internalize it, but it's going to take a while, and I understand that. And but I'm just happy that mom knows, dad knows, and right now we're just kind of letting that digest and work through the system. But let's see. To go back a little bit, at Midwest Fur Fest, right after I had dyed my hair last year, a friend convinced me to present female the entire convention. And up until that point, I had toyed around with the idea, but when she put it up for me to do it, yeah, and I was determined to do to dip my toes into the water, so to speak, because I kind of think that at least with some stuff, it's easier if you're doing it for somebody else. I mean, even if it's for you internally, if you're doing it because somebody else is, asking you to do this, is supporting you that little bit, sometimes that little extra just makes worlds of difference. And uh, for Furfest, for me, I had a couple of outfits that I had already been collecting because I had sort of been heading in that direction. And, I had some dresses and some skirts that I liked. And so I brought them with me to make sure that I wouldn't chicken out and just dress male the whole time. I bought one set of guy clothes and pretty much dressed female the entire rest of the weekend. And I thought it was really validating for me because it really confirmed that, this is the decision that I need to make and this is the place that I need to go. So, in addition to presenting in the convention space, I went to the local mall to buy some perfumes, some clothes, and a few other things that I added to what I call my women's starting kit, and was taken to a makeup shop where I had my first introduction to makeup. And they showed me like foundation, liquid lipstick, which I never knew came in a liquid form. Apparently, it's just something you just kind of dab on, and let's see. They also used eyeliner, and so here's what I looked like when I came out of the makeup store. And I thought it was pretty impressive and pretty mind blowing how just little things like this, just a little bit, makes a big difference in terms of how your presentation appears. I mean, the divide between male and female is not as much of a gigantic gap as I once thought it was. Just a little bit of like how I wear my hair and how you dress and a few other things. And it's just, I mean, people kind of, I think, need visual cues. And as long as they have that, like they can more easily click it over in their heads. I know when I first started transitioning, it took me a couple of weeks before I mentally started referring to myself as Lauren and she. And and when I told Ben about this, he was kind. It took him a while too, and I told him it's like I understand. Trust me, it takes a while because when your head's referring to yourself a certain way for 30 something years, it takes more than an instantaneous click to switch it over. And every once in a while, I slip, he slips. It's like I don't make a big deal about pronouns because I mean, if I get it. It's like most of the people that know me have known me forever as who I used to be. And that being said, it's like it takes time, and I get that. And really, all I care about is the fact that you're trying, that the effort is there, and that you're supportive. And beyond that, it's not a big deal. So, let's see. On my own, I had purchased some dark blue nail polish. This is currently what I use. It says Zoya Pixie Dust, and it's kind of like blue and glittery because I asked Twitter whether or not they wanted glitter or non-glitter, and they said glitter. So I went with that. And uh, I kind of like it. I mean, at this point, I'm just used to having my nails being blue. It's like anytime they're a normal color, it just looks weird to me now. So I just always use my dark blue nail polish now. And work has seen the nail polish, and the nail polish is part of the appearance policy. That's kind of one of the reasons why I've hesitated on dyeing my hair again, because right now technically it's not. Well, it wasn't against policy when I did it, but that's a whole nother story. But anyway, I just should say that generally speaking, right now I present female 90% of the time. The only cases that I don't is where I have to present ID, like at the airport or something right now, or a few other settings, but at some point that'll change. I haven't taken any legal steps to change my name or that little letter on my ID yet because honestly I'm a little bit clueless about what that all involves, but that's something that I'll address at some point. But I know that I'm going to go by Lauren Rivers because, one way or another, she is me and I am her. And, it's obviously, the blue hair. It's like I might not be an Afro zebra, but it's yeah, it's one of the it was probably the easiest thing about my decision to transition, because that part there was no question from me on that. And recently, I made the decision to officially begin HRT. So these are the hormone pills, which is new to me. So yeah, I kind of have been joking that they're to treat my case of testosterone poisoning, which I entirely credit to Babylon 5. So, if you've seen that show, you probably get the reference. But I think one of the biggest barriers to accepting transgender people and other alternative lifestyles is just not understanding. So, I mean, I've made this video to kind of explain as best I can both where I'm coming from, and perhaps to other people who might need something to explain exactly how this all works and how this feels to them. And I can only speak to my own experience, but this is kind of what I have felt so far, what I've experienced. And I mean, if you know someone who is, or you think might be transgender, just be supportive, because it's a big step. It's a big step for them. It's important, and it's something that they might not necessarily know how to communicate or even how to internalize to themselves. So, I mean, if like I know a couple of people that's like I really, I mean, at least from the outside perspective, I can tell they're pretty transgender, but they're still on the fence, and that's okay. It's just, I mean, at some point you're going to have to, you have the same two choices: either do it or don't. And, for me, I mean, the easiest thing was when I had to ask myself if I can deal with not following this through. And, when the answer was no, it just kind of made the rest of it a lot easier. So that's about it for now. And, hopefully this has been helpful.
Thanks for watching, and if you liked it, click the subscribe button and leave a comment below. You can also find me on Twitter and a few other places on the web, or support me via Patreon or Ko-fi. Zebra hugs!